Hey guys, my name's Kim and this is my channel Expedition Through Pages. Today I thought that I would wrap up the rest of my April reading. I did a part 1 kind of wrap up, so I'll link that down in the description if you wanted to check that out. But yeah, I just thought I'd just run over the couple of books that I finished in addition to those. I'm also just going to be wrapping up TBR Trail for April. For April's TBR Trail I actually played extra roles for my mum as well, so my mum has done her wrap up and I'm going to put it at the end of this video. So actually while I'm recording this I haven't actually watched it yet so I'm excited to watch it after I film this. So technically in April I only actually read one more book, which was The Girl You Left Behind by Jojo Moyes. So in this book you're following, well, it's kind of the story about a painting and about the history of a painting and what's happened to this painting over the years. So it's set into two different timelines, and the first timeline is set in World War I in France, while specifically kind of in a town that's been occupied by the German army, and in that timeline you're following Sophie. So the picture is actually a portrait of Sophie that her husband did for her, but the German commandant that's in charge of the town actually takes quite a liking to Sophie and this picture, and so that's that storyline. And then about 120 pages in you skip to a different timeline, which is 2006, and you start following Liv, and now she has the picture and her husband, who has passed away, he gave it to her as a honeymoon present, so the picture is very, very like dear to her. And then people start to realise that actually the painting that Sophie has is worth a lot of money, because now Sophie's husband seems to have become like a big artist over the years, and so there's a bit of a battle begins about this painting. And that's kind of the basic premise. I mean, I would say that I did like this. I think it was like a solid 3-star. I did enjoy it. I was kind of intrigued as I went along. I wasn't that enamoured with the ending, to be honest. I feel like some discussion was kind of left out of the conversation, to be honest. But without spoiling it, I can't really say like what that was. And also I kind of didn't get on too well with the fact that we followed Sophie for like 120 pages at the beginning, and I was quite invested in her storyline, and then you skip to Liv, and then you have a lot of Liv's storyline, and then you get back to Sophie and it starts flip-flopping a bit between the two. And yeah, I don't know, when I was reading Liv's, because it has such a different vibe, because such a different time, although it's funny because it did feel quite like nostalgic, because actually Liv's time was 2006, so she's talking about iPods and all of that kind of stuff, so it feels quite dated now. But yeah, I kind of, when I was reading about Liv, I was kind of forgetting what I'd read about Sophie because there was so much of a gap, and I don't know if I would have preferred it if the stories had intertwined a little bit more, so it wasn't like a lump of Sophie's story and then a lump of Liv's story. But then again, I did kind of read it slowly, so maybe that's just a fault of my own because it took me so long to like get through it. So if I'd read it quicker, maybe it wouldn't have felt like I'd forgotten about Sophie's story, you know? But yeah, I think that's all I'm really going to say about this one. I thought it was okay. I did enjoy it. I didn't really love it. But I do want to pick up more Jojo Moyes because I know that this is definitely not her most popular story, so I do want to pick up something else by her in the future. Then I tried to pick up Codename Verity by Elizabeth Wein, and that was for the Eurovision-a-thon. That was going to be my read for France. But I think what I will say about this book actually is that it portrayed like the horrors of World War I very clearly, and there was like very upsetting scenes in this, I will say, and like shocking scenes. You can imagine World War I, World War II, the kind of horrors that happened. And Codename Verity, it's a YA book about pilots, female pilots in World War II. And it kind of starts out a little bit about a girl who's been captured in France, but she's been interrogated by some Germans, and it's written in a very kind of, I guess, like a farcical way. Like, she's saying that they're doing these horrible things to her, but then she's using very, very like casual slang language and like very modern day kind of way of speaking, and laughing and joking about a bit about it. So I guess, is it like a dark comedy kind of thing? I don't really know what it was, but I think after reading this book and like having the reality of these horrors portrayed quite blatantly and quite in a harrowing way, to read Codename Verity, it wasn't like the right time to read it after reading a very serious account of it, to read kind of like a jokey account of it, you know? It just didn't work for me. at that time, so I put it to one side, which is a shame because that's what I wanted to read for Eurovisionathon. Then the last book that I'm going to talk about, which technically I finished in May, but it was on my April TBR, is The Planet Factory by Elizabeth Tasker. This book we actually read for the X Book Club because the theme was space. So we read this book and we read Reaching for the Moon by Katherine Johnson, and if you wanted to see the live discussion for that, I'll link that down below. We had a good discussion and Hannah's partner Tom was there. He did a PhD in astronomy. Yeah, so I'll link that down below if you want to check that out. But this book, it's about exoplanets and it's about the search for second Earth, as it says here. Exoplanets is like a very new field in astronomy because it's only very recently that we've been able to detect planets around other stars, which is what exoplanets are. And what Elizabeth Tasker is trying to do in this book is to just tell you how it is in the field at the moment, what scientists know, what they need to do to find these planets, like the methods that they use, what they think they know about planets that they've found around other stars and how different they are to planets in our solar system. She also kind of talks about what it means for life on those planets a bit towards the end and how we can possibly search and recognise if there is life on other planets. I will say that it's quite technical, it's very technical. She goes into a lot of detail and it felt quite dense when I was reading it, but there's a lot of information in here, and if you wanted to know about exoplanets, this is like full of information. But it is technical, it is difficult to follow in parts. I did enjoy it, but I felt like it was a little bit like relentless in its kind of information in a way, because I guess the point Elizabeth maybe was trying to make, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but is the fact that there's so many different options as to what these planets could be like, because we don't have all the tools we need at the moment, or have like the data we need to be able to work things out properly. There's so many different options that when you see a headline in a newspaper, scientists have found second Earth, you have to stop and think, well, wait, have they? Because there's all these reasons as to why it probably isn't going to be anything like Earth. Definitely great if you want to know the ins and outs of everything, but it is a lot of information in this little book. And it did take me quite a while to get through it. I have to say as well is that now I'm a little bit worried that they're not going to find life in my lifetime, which is kind of sad because I really want to know if there is life out there. Cool, so those are the books I wanted to chat to you about today. Going to my TBR for April's TBR Trail, these were the 4 books that I had to read. I did say to myself with Ideas and Opinions by Albert Einstein I was only going to read a tiny amount. To be honest, I only read 1 or 2 pieces, so I'm not going to talk about it today because I read them right at the beginning of April and I can't quite remember what I read now. But I'm gonna excuse myself with this one for the month. It's a bit of a cheat, but I did read 1 or 2 pieces, so I'm going to take that as a win. A very, very scraped by win. And then these 3 I did read. So I spoke to you about these 2 today, and the other one that I read was The Quantum Universe, Everything That Can Happen Does Happen by Brian Cox and Jeff Forshaw. And yeah, I'm really proud of myself that I read these 3, especially because these 2 sciencey ones were quite a lot of information overload and took a while to get through. And actually The Girl You Left Behind as well took a while to get through too. But yeah, so I'm really pleased with my reading for April. I found out a lot of cool stuff. Okay, so now I'm going to pass over to my mum and she can talk to you about what she read.
Hi everyone, hope everybody's okay. My name's Julie and I'm Kimberly's mum. I referred to myself as Kim's mum last time and she said that was strange, so I've gone back to saying Kimberly's mum. During April, Kimberly asked me, actually I asked her, if I could take part in her TBR Trail game, and she said yes. And she chose out 4 categories for me, and I chose 4 books to attempt to read during April. So this is the result of what happened. Okay, there were 4 books that I chose, and I can't remember what the categories were now because I've lost the piece of paper that said what they were. But the first book that I chose to read was this one. This is Daphne du Maurier's, can you see that? Frenchman's Creek, which is a bit of a classic. So basically it's set a long time ago. I don't know how long ago it was set actually. Maybe around the 1800 and something. And but written in around the 1940s, I think. And basically it's a story about a lady called Dana who's fairly well off, and she lives in London with her husband and her 2 children, a little girl and a baby boy. And basically she's a bit bored with life. So she takes herself off down to Cornwall, and there she encounters a pirate. Don't ask me his name, I don't think I ever saw that. And they have a little bit of a, how should I put it? They have a little bit of an affair while she's down there in Cornwall. So what did I think of the book? Lots of people really love this style of writing, like classic style, you know, the very descriptive build up to, you know, what the atmosphere is like, and the birds are flying in the sky and the seas crashing on the shore. Is not really my favourite kind of writing style, to be honest. I'd rather they just got on with the story. So that said, I did cheat a tiny little bit. I read the first bit, then I thought there must be an easier way to get past all of this descriptive. So I went and looked to see if there was a film of it, which is terrible, I know, but I went to look and see if there was a film, and there was, but it was appalling. And then I found Radio 4, BBC Radio 4, did a play version of it, and I thought that's perfect. So I had it playing while I was cooking one day, and I listened to the story and I got quite into it, and it ended, and I thought it was a bit of a strange ending, but you know, hey ho. Then I had a little chat with Kimberly, who said, "Are you sure you've read the entire book?" I said, yeah, it came to an end. It said, you know. Anyway, so then I went back to looking at the book, and no, it wasn't the end. It was only halfway through the story. So then I thought, I better be good, really. And I read the second half of the book, and I really liked it. It had a lot of humour in it, had a little bit of a shocking twist in it somewhere. And ultimately, I did like the story. You know, it's quite a simple little story. Woman goes on holiday, has an affair, etc. So nothing too sort of thrilling in there, not from my point of view anyway, but lots of people really liked it. So if I had to give it points out of 5, I would probably give it a really stingy 2.5. Isn't that terrible? Loads of people give it 5, but it's not really my cup of tea. But it was a little bit of fun. It was interesting the way that I tackled the book anyway. So that was the first one. And then the second book I chose, completely different. This is autobiographical, really, by a guy called Nicky Campbell. Let me just get over there. Nicky Campbell, yeah. And he's a TV presenter in the UK. He does a programme called Long Lost Families. And he was adopted himself when he was a small child. And this tells his story of how he suffered severe mental illness, but he didn't realise that he was suffering mental illness because of what had happened to him in his early life, and how he sets out to find his birth mother, what happens after that. Let's just say it's not entirely as he expects. Quite often you'll watch these programmes and it'll be all lovely and everyone will run into each other's arms, but it wasn't like that for Nicky. So I'm gonna leave you with the intrigue there. So I would recommend it as a good book to read, and I did feel that Nicky Campbell still has a way to go to overcome some of his issues. There were times in the book where he was writing in quite a frantic style, and I felt that he was trying to get everything out, but he couldn't quite, so he went on and on a bit, which is a bit like me really. So anyway, it's called Nicky Campbell, One of the Family, and it's called Why a Dog Called Maxwell Changed My Life, and that's Maxwell, and the dog theme runs a little bit throughout the story. So I would recommend that. If I had to give that 4 out of 5, if I had to give that points out of 5, I would give it 4, because it's very different to anything that I'd read before. So the third book, again, I can't remember what the category was, but the third book, Kimberly can just write that up in a corner, can't she? You can do that for me, good. The third book I chose was a classic sci-fi called A Fall of Moondust by Arthur C. Clarke. Now this is a book I first read when I was a teenager, and I loved it. Was I a teenager? Yeah, it was. And I loved it, and I thought I really need to reread that because it was such a good story. I started reading the story, and it's set on the moon. Funny that. It's set on the moon. And they build like a base on the moon, and rich people can go there on holiday, and as part of it there's a special kind of ship that they can go on on a trip across the sea of something or another. I've forgotten what it's called now. This is just an age thing. Ignore me. Anyway, they go out on this and it sinks below this not quite dust, not quite water substance that they believed to be on the moon at the time. And when I was reading that, unfortunately on the news there was talk of a submarine that had gone missing, and I didn't, and it was lost at sea, and it kind of made me then feel a bit sad. And I didn't really want to read a fictional story about fictional people being, you know, lost in a ship and having to be found. So for now, I've put that to one side. It felt a little bit wrong to carry on reading it for now. But from what I can remember, from how much I loved it before, when I was a teenager, I would definitely have given it 5 out of 5. So it would be interesting to see what measly points I give it now I'm older and more cynical. Anyway, the 4th book that I chose, this is one that came out in 1982, and it's called The Secret Diary of Adrian Mole, aged 13 3/4, by Sue Townsend. So if you've got anybody watching from other countries who may not have heard of Adrian Mole, you may have done, or you may not have done. But basically it is written like a diary. So it will say January the 1st, and it will say Epiphany or whatever. And then he writes in there and he will say, oh, you know, Grandma came round and blah, blah, blah. And he starts writing this little diary. He literally writes his diary every night when he goes to bed. And it is the funniest story. Now, when I read this back in the 80s, it was funny. And that was all that I thought about it, was just that it was funny. Now I'm looking back on it, it's more like a slightly historical piece of writing, as well as these cultural references to having to take the empty pop bottles back to the off licence to get 10 pence back each on them. They've got a telephone in the house. You know, there's no mobile phones or anything like that back in the day. There's lots of references like that, which people in my age group, which is in their 50s and 40s and 60s, 70s, would love to read all of that and just sort of think. But for people who are much younger, it is a real snapshot of what England was like, I would say, back in the 1980s, with all of its prejudices exposed. I don't want to go on too much about that because it make it sound like Adrian Mole was a horrible character, but all he was a product of his time. But I love Adrian Mole books, I do, even though I did go, oh, you can't say that, oh no, you can't put that, several times. It's just a very funny piece of writing, as long as you read it in the context of the time that it was written in, and you don't really think much further than that. But basically, he has a bit of an upsetting home life, shall we say. He's got an obsession with a girl at school. He looks after an old age pensioner. I don't know why he does that, how he first got into that, but he has to go around there and look after his dog as well. And it's just all the intertwining, but he is a nice person, and I think that that's the important thing of this. And I would still give Adrian Mole 5 out of 5. So, to sum up, of the 4 books that I was asked to read, I did 3 and a tiny bit. So I didn't think that that was too bad. Anyway, that's all for me. I talk far too much. I just want to thank Kimberly again for asking me to do this, and it would be great if anyone's watching this, if you also asked to join in. I'm sure Kimberly would be happy to play the game for you and see how you get on with your choices. All right then, thanks very much for watching. Take care. Sorry the table's shaking, that's me wobbling it. And maybe I'll see you again another time. Take care everyone. Bye.